So this is the third part of the fifth lecture. So in the first two parts, we talked about the what kind of a word distribution we observe in corpus, and what do we mean by co-locations. Now in this lecture, in this part of the lecture, we are going to talk about how we are going to find a co-location. So let's talk about a few methods. So one of the very basic approach is that you can look into the frequency of the the two words or the tokens which are occurring quite frequently. So the assumption is that the more frequent occurrence of the two words together may imply the special function or property which can be simply explained. Based on this assumption, you can try to use this method and to identify. So, uh, and what we observe here is that again there are you see that these the function words are coming together quite often, and you don't get any meaningful co-location here. So all of them are in fact none of them in this particular table is a co-location. But what we can do to take care of such thing, so you can perhaps do very simple thing. So if you can add some linguistic knowledge uh, along with the frequency, perhaps the result may improve. So what uh, people have tried is that they try to identify certain patterns of the co-locations, and they say that if the frequency is high, as well as if the pattern uh, is of those words are like this, then they can be considered as a co-locations. So these patterns are based on the part of the speech tags. So for each of the words, you first identify the part of speech, and then you see that which of these patterns are there. So in one of the studies, uh, they have proposed a, a small set of the tags, which is sort of the indicative of the co-locations. And in this particular case, where A stands for adjective, N stands for noun, and P stands for prepositions. So if the words which are having this particular pattern, and as well as they are very frequent, then you can consider them as a co-location. So based on that, and the same corpus, when they have applied this, so what we see is that okay, most of the words, most of the let's say the co-location or the bigrams can be considered as a co-locations, except few ones like the last year, last week, York City, and next year. And rest others can be considered as a co-locations. And if you remember, we have talked about most of these co-locations are coming as a special kind of a co-location. Um, you know, uh, most of them are look like a proper noun. So nevertheless, we don't want them to be sort of separated, and we want them to be grouped together and identified in that way, and that is why it has been sort of put into the category of the co-locations as well. Uh, so now you can see that the simple. Uh, so there are two things I would like to highlight. One is that the simple idea of the frequency added with the linguistic knowledge that what can constitute what kind of a part of speech patterns should be there to be considered as a co-location, and that has worked very nicely for this particular example. So that is the one thing, that the simple idea also may give you good result. The second is that the kind of a co-location you observe here again highlights that are dependent on the corpus which you are taking. So these are the news articles coming from the New York Times, and the names, and in fact the year 90 sort of also being indicative of the the kind of a beaming international issue at that particular time, and that is why this kind of a co-locations or this kind of a the bigrams which are considered as a co-locations is appearing here. So again, this kind of analysis sort of already gives you some idea that uh, you know what kind of situations were there at that particular time. The pros and cons of the frequency and part of speech filter. Of course, it is a very simple method, and that is it's the biggest advantage. Disadvantage is that you need to design those kind of a filter. So you have to be dependent on the experts here who can understand and who can define such kind of a filter. Uh, and then what we see that the high frequency can be random without any specific meaning. So for example, there were a few examples we see in the last table, like last year or something like that. So those were highly they were frequent, but they don't really have any meaning, or they, they cannot be called as a co-locations. uh, and they work for kind of a fixed phrases. That means that they work for the phrases which have these, or the co-locations which have these consecutive words, but they may not work for cases, and in fact they will not work for cases where variable number of words may exist between two words. So again, this example of knock on his door. So there are two words between the co-located word knock and door. So in those case, what we can do? So here again, a simple idea of the sliding window could be, save us. And so what you can do is that you consider the bigrams where you do some sort of a, of course there is a kind of an hyperparameter that how long you want to consider this sliding window. So you take this man knock, man on, man the, man front, then you look into the knock on, then knock the, and knock front. So you consider a particular window and you slide after, let's say that you want to consider a window size of, let's say that 4. So this is your the one fixed word, the man, and you consider, let's say, next 4 word by sliding those windows. So I mean, first you only consider knock, then you move your window to the on, and then you again move your window to the. So man is fixed, and then you keep changing the next word, and you are going to consider only up to certain distance. You don't want to, for example, if the word a sentence is like the man knocked on the front door uh, of, let's say that my hotel room or something, then you are not going to consider perhaps the entire sentence. You want to fix the window size. With that window only you want to consider all the bigrams within that window. So in with all the other words I have it, like for example, shown this particular example. Okay. Hopefully the idea is clear by looking at this example. Uh, so once you have considered all those diagrams, then you can again do the same, the frequency and perhaps the QoS filter, and identify that what are those. I mean, you can identify that what are the co-locations. So in the next class, I am going to talk about the statistical methods to identify the co-locations. And in the next class only, I will try to finish the all possible statistical methods which are there to identify collocations. That's the end of the fifth lecture.